It needed but little political arithmetic to work out the sum of existing political chances. It was almost self-evident that in the coming November election victory or defeat would hang upon the result in the four pivotal states of New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Indiana, and Illinois. It was quite certain that no Republican candidate could carry a single one of the 15 slave states, and equally sure that Breckinridge, on his extreme pro-slavery platform, could not carry a single one of the 18 free states. But there was a chance that one or more of these four pivotal free states might cast its vote for Douglas and popular sovereignty. A candidate was needed, therefore, who could successfully cope with Douglas and the Douglas theory, and this ability had been convincingly demonstrated by Lincoln. As a mere personal choice, a majority of the convention would have preferred Seward, but in the four pivotal states there were many voters who believed Seward's anti-slavery views to be too radical. They shrank apprehensively from the phrase in one of his speeches that "there is a higher law than the Constitution." These pivotal states all lay adjoining slave states, and their public opinion was infected with something of the undefined dread of abolitionism. When the delegates of the pivotal states were interviewed, they frankly confessed that they could not carry their states for Seward, and that would mean certain defeat if he were the nominee for president. For their voters Lincoln stood on more acceptable ground. His speeches had been more conservative, his local influence in his own state of Illinois was also a factor not to be idly thrown away. Plain practical reasoning of this character found ready acceptance among the delegates to the convention. Their eagerness for the success of the cause largely overbalanced their personal preferences for favorite aspirants. When the convention met, the fresh, hearty hopefulness of its members was a most inspiring reflection of the public opinion in the states that sent them. They went at their work with an earnestness which was an encouraging premonition of success, and they felt a gratifying support in the presence of the 10,000 spectators who looked on at their work. Few conventions have ever been pervaded by such a depth of feeling or exhibited such a reserve of latent enthusiasm. The cheers that greeted the entrance of popular favorites, and the short speeches on preliminary business, ran and rolled through the great audience in successive moving waves of sound that were echoed and re-echoed from side to side in the vast building. Not alone the delegates on the central platform, but in the multitude of spectators as well, felt they were playing a part in a great historical event. The temporary and afterward the permanent organization was finished on the first day, with somewhat less than usual of the wordy and tantalizing small talk which these routine proceedings always call forth. On the second day the platform committee submitted its work, embodying the carefully considered and skillfully framed body of doctrines of which the Republican party, made up only 4 years before from such previously heterogeneous and antagonistic political elements, was now able to find common and durable ground of agreement. Around its central tenet, which denied the authority of Congress, of territorial legislature, or of any individuals to give legal existence to slavery in any territory of the United States, were grouped vigorous denunciations of the various steps and incidents of the pro-slavery reaction and its prospective demands, while its positive recommendations embraced the immediate admission of Kansas, free homesteads to actual settlers, river and harbor improvements of national character, a railroad to the Pacific Ocean, and the maintenance of existing naturalization laws. The platform was about to be adopted without objection when a flurry of discussion arose over an amendment, proposed by Mr. Giddings of Ohio, to incorporate in it the phrase of the Declaration of Independence, which declares the right of all men to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Impatience was at once manifested lest any change should produce endless delay and dispute. "I believe in the 10 Commandments," commented a member, "but I do not want them in a political platform," and the proposition was voted down. Upon this the old anti-slavery veteran felt himself aggrieved, and taking up his hat, marched out of the convention. In the course of an hour's desultory discussion, however, a member, with stirring oratorical emphasis, asked whether the convention was prepared to go upon record before the country as voting down the words of the Declaration of Independence; whether the men of 1860 on the free prairies of the West quailed before repeating the words enunciated by the men in '76 at Philadelphia. In an impulse of patriotic reaction the amendment was incorporated into the platform, and Mr. Giddings was brought back by his friends, his face beaming with triumph, and the stormy acclaim of the audience manifested the deep feeling which the incident evoked. On the third day it was certain that balloting would begin, and crowds hurried to the wigwam in a fever of curiosity. Having grown restless at the indispensable routine preliminaries, when Mr. Evarts nominated William H. Seward of New York for President, they greeted his name with a perfect storm of applause. Then Mr. Judd nominated Abraham Lincoln of Illinois, and in the tremendous cheering that broke from the throats of his admirers and followers, the former demonstration dwindled to comparative feebleness. Again and again these contests of lungs and enthusiasm were repeated, as the choice of New York was seconded by Michigan, and that of Illinois by Indiana. When other names had been duly presented, the cheering at length subsided, and the chairman announced that balloting would begin. Many spectators had provided themselves with tally lists, and when the first roll call was completed were able at once to perceive the drift of popular preference. Cameron, Chase, Bates, McLean, Dayton, and Collamer were endorsed by the substantial votes of their own states. But two names stood out in marked superiority: Seward, who had received 173 1/2 votes, and Lincoln 102. The New York delegation was so thoroughly persuaded of the final success of their candidate that they did not comprehend the significance of this first ballot. Had they reflected that their delegation alone had contributed 70 votes to Seward's total, they would have understood that outside of the Empire State, upon this first showing, Lincoln held their favorite almost in even race. As the second ballot progressed their anxiety visibly increased. They watched with eagerness as the complimentary votes first cast for state favorites were transferred now to one, now to the other of the recognized leaders in the contest, and their hopes sank when the result of the second ballot was announced: Seward 184 1/2, Lincoln 181, and a volume of applause, which was with difficulty checked by the chairman, shook the wigwam at this announcement. Then followed a short interval of active caucusing in the various delegations, while excited men went about rapidly interchanging questions, solicitations, and messages between delegations from different states. Neither candidate had yet received a majority of all the votes cast, and the third ballot was begun amid a deep, almost painful suspense, delegates and spectators alike recording each announcement of votes on their tally sheets with nervous fingers. But the doubt was of short duration. Before the secretaries made the official announcement, the totals had been figured up: Lincoln 231 1/2, Seward 180. Counting the scattering votes, 465 ballots had been cast, and 233 were necessary to a choice. Seward had lost 4 1/2. Lincoln had gained 50 1/2, and only 1 1/2 votes more were needed to make a nomination. The wigwam suddenly became as still as a church, and everybody leaned forward to see whose voice would break the spell. Before the lapse of a minute, David K. Carter sprang upon his chair and reported a change of 4 Ohio votes from Chase to Lincoln. Then a teller shouted a name toward the skylight, and the boom of cannon from the roof of the wigwam announced the nomination and started the cheering of the overjoyed Illinoisans down the long Chicago streets. While in the wigwam, delegation after delegation changed its vote to the victor amid a tumult of hurrahs. When quiet was somewhat restored, Mr. Evarts, speaking for New York and for Seward, moved to make the nomination unanimous, and Mr. Browning gracefully returned the thanks of Illinois for the honor the convention had conferred upon the state. In the afternoon the convention completed its work by nominating Hannibal Hamlin of Maine for vice president, and as the delegates sped homeward in the night trains, they witnessed in the bonfires and cheering crowds at the stations that the memorable presidential campaign was already begun. End of chapter 10.